Right, welcome. We're live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. You're watching the Week in Review with myself, Liesl Wilson. Let's take a look at what we can expect as the ANC's 55th National Conference of Day 2 gets underway. Well, we take you there shortly to the ANC's 55th National Elective Conference. It is Day 2. Also coming up, we speak to energy expert Ted Blom on Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter's resignation. All right, live action, of course, coming from Nasrec in Johannesburg, also here from Auckland Park Studios. I am Liesl Wilson. We are going to be taking a look at some of those big stories that have made headlines this week, perhaps also bringing you rolling coverage of the conference that is happening. In fact, reporters stationed in and around the city to bring us the latest there. And let's get straight into it. Of the ANC's National Conference is the nomination and voting for the top 6 office bearers. Yesterday, party president Cyril Ramaphosa got a hostile reception from some delegates when he opened the ANC's National Conference. Perhaps for this and more, let's bring our reporter Natasha Piri. Natasha, good afternoon. Perhaps you can walk us through what has transpired as Day 2 kicked off and also what we can expect for the rest of the day.
Well, very good afternoon to you, Liesl. And of course, SABC viewers, indeed, like you've indicated, today is a very important day. Despite those commissions, we'll be seeing the nomination of the top 6 later on. Of course, that is highly, contested. As we know, I mean, we've been speaking to my colleague, Samgele Masego, just unpacking the different dynamics, the different, brokerings that have been happening behind the scenes. But Liesl, I actually want to talk to a person that we've spoken to earlier on in the run-up to the 55th National Conference of the ANC. At first, she was a candidate for the position of Deputy President Mamoloko Kubai. Unfortunately, she did not meet the threshold, but we'll be talking to her right now. Mamoloko, thank you so much for joining us on SABC News. I mean, the last time we spoke and we had an interview, you were a candidate leading up to, this conference. You were nominated by your branch for Deputy President. Unfortunately, you didn't meet the threshold. But I mean, what's interesting about this conference is that, as they say, amandla asemasebeni, the powers in the branches. Should you be nominated from the floor, should you reach the threshold of 25%, will you accept?
Now, if I do reach the threshold, I'll accept. But it's not something that you take for granted. 25% on the floor is not an easy thing. So looking at numbers, talking to people, right now already there are 2 groups in terms of caucuses who are looking at that, and I don't feature in both of them. So as you know, over time, it has been a campaign that I've not run aligned to any, while I support the president. My support for the president is my support for the president. And I've always said it's not automatical to everybody else that is contesting, that is associated with him. So it has been that journey. We are here, quite fascinating. And I say to people, one, there are lessons learned out of this journey. It's one thing I don't regret having done. If given another opportunity, I'll do it again. I've gained, as I said to other colleagues, I've gained a label of being a rebel. I wear it with pride because it means I've done what I wanted to do to disrupt. We can't continue in a society like this one. South Africa, where you have more than 60% of women, and you still have a leadership of an ANC, which is the leader of our society, the biggest organization, a very influential organization that does not have women in leadership position, and especially key positions. So we'll continue to fight, even in plenary, we'll fight for women. It's not about only me, as I said previously, it's about achieving that 50% of women in that top 6. That is something that I'm not backing down on. Whether I make it or not, whether it's me or not, that one will go and fight it on the floor in plenary for women to be elected. It's the right and a principle fight that we have to fight. The other issue for me out of this journey that one has learned is that maybe we should have tried and ensure that as we were doing the constitutional amendment, to do that in constitutional amendment, to rely on consciousness of people to remember that they've got to elect women. It's clearly not working. Therefore, we've got to put it in the constitution so that we force it to happen.
You know, you've touched on so many issues that I actually want to talk to. But I mean, on the issue of the president, it's no secret that you're supporting the president, the other positions as well. I mean, you've just spoken about the issue of women. Would you like to see the likes of Nomvula Mokonya and Phoebe Potita taking the position of DSG? Can you just announce who you actually support for the other positions?
All women who are standing. That one I will support. The women who are standing, who made it the ballot. Currently, we have Comrade Phoebe, Comrade Nomvula, and I hope they don't contest each other. Would want to see, because we've got to do away with this fact that when women contest, then we are put against each other to contest each other, instead of literally making way and supporting each other. So with that, we have a constitutional amendment coming in to say that we'll have first DSG and second DSG. I'm hoping that both of them will make it, and we support both of them. There are women who have made it. I don't think there's anything wrong with both of them. I would want to support them. But I would want to see another woman in that top 6. So it's one of the things that one would see. If it's top 7, at least then let's get somewhere. A balance in terms of those who are coming back, a balance in terms of some of the elderly, a balance with the younger generations.
Ms. Kopai, I'm so glad that you actually touched on this topic of 2 Deputy Secretary Generals. This is a discussion we were actually having with my colleagues earlier on. But our argument is that why should women occupy just only the positions of DSG? Why can't it be Secretary General?
No, look, that's the issue. And unfortunately, we do not have any woman who qualified for the ballot. As I'm saying, to go on the floor, we've availed ourselves. For example, I did. Deputy President, yes, is a deputy, but it has never been occupied by any woman. So to avail yourself and you never made a threshold, it's an indictment on all of us in the ANC, not only women, all of us in the ANC, that women raised their hands, they were not voted for. It's not that they were not there, they were there. And that's why the reflection must be, what is it that we need to do? That's why we must work towards just forcing it through constitutional amendment so that we can do it, because we've tried it, it's not working, it has not happened. And there are many factors. I mean, it's a patriarchal society, patriarchal organization, and the rules are in such a manner that are disadvantaging women. And another issue, for example, when you campaign, resources are needed. You hardly find business people who are willing to support women who are contesting. So you're finding their support on men. And that's why I'm perhaps even calling on women business leaders and others who believe in women leadership to say, you missed it here. Can you just consciously in the future take a decision to support women? Because there is no way that you can run a campaign without resources. But another issue, for example, there are lessons that we can learn from sister parties that we have, SWAPO. I understand that how they do it, they as an organization create a platform for women to be able to go and sell themselves in there and others. And that's why they could have a Secretary General who is a woman. So it's those things that we've got to learn from other sister parties, how they are doing it, how they're making it, and adopt them for the ANC.
This conference, you've just got 1 minute. It's not only about the nomination, the election of candidates, but you've mentioned the constitutional amendments. You've also mentioned the policies of the ANC. I'm more interested in the chemical castration.
It's unconstitutional in terms of South African laws.
That's ill.
Our constitution and our policies can't contradict what the constitution is. The premise of our existence as the ANC, we advocated for that constitution. We led to what that constitution is about. And our responsibility is to ensure that what we do, the policies we pass, the laws that we pass, because otherwise we're going to have a resolution here that is unimplementable.
Thank you so much for your time. I would love to have this conversation with you. Hopefully we'll catch up with you later on. That was Mamloko Kopai, who's an outgoing ANC NEC member. Of course, just having interesting conversations here in Naledi. And also the constitutional amendment of having 2 deputy secretary generals. Will the ANC actually pass this or not? With that said, Naledi, it's back to you in the studio.
To run for the position of Deputy President of the African National Congress. But let's get some analysis of that with our very own SABC News political editor, Mr. Mzwandi Lembeche. Good afternoon to you. It's been a busy day and a half. How are you feeling so far?
Well, it feels like we've just begun, but you know what? we're in it
Yeah.
to conclude it.
Yeah, what do you make of that discussion that Natasha Puri just had there with Mameluko Kubai? She didn't make the threshold. She was hoping to run for deputy president. I think when we actually saw Natasha Puri interview her just a few weeks ago, and it was a very interesting, certainly an interesting interview, and there was a lot of optimism, I think. Were you optimistic at that point, or were you concerned that, you know, that she might not actually make the threshold?
Well, understanding how the branches of the ANC normally operate and perhaps being on the ground, I guess from her part, it was courageous that she would say, young as I am, obviously relative to the leadership that exists,
Of course.
that she would avail herself for the position of deputy president. I guess that was courageous on her part. But of course, you are dealing with an ANC that has entrenched traditions and way of doing things. As much as they, I guess, would want to see younger blood coming in, there would be some people who would be a bit skeptical, because sometimes it's not so much what you say, Naledi, it's what you do. Everyone talks about, we want to see young leadership emerge, but at the crunch, not so much, or even women leadership. But maybe we do need to give a bit of credit to the ANC. Remember, the NEC, as it stands, it's actually 50-50. So it has to be 50% women, 50% men. So that is achieved. So the top 6, for example, that the women are now going for, trying to convince, is not necessarily a structure. And I think that's why it's not been able for them to be able to move that aspect, because so they part of that that NEC. But you know, and then the issue then it will have to be about positions, because yes, as much as it's not a structure, the top 6, that is actually the most prominent faces of the party. That's why everyone cares when the top 6 speaks. So yes, and here is the thing for me, which maybe it's societal. The representation, even at this conference, it has to be 50-50. So which means women theoretically should have an equal chance, but it doesn't happen. And then you ask why. Maybe it's about us as the society. It's what they need to work on and change in terms of perceptions.
Well, I want to sit on the issue of it being about society, but before I do that, can I play devil's advocate here and say, well, it is certainly one thing to say that we live in a patriarchal society where women may not be seen as able to lead, but do you also want leadership that is fully representational with a body as powerful as the top 6, and then have women's representation there and have concerns that it may be just cosmetic, that representation?
I think the argument around there, Nalet, is that, I mean, let's be honest, you and I, by virtue of being a man, I'm not better than you.
Yes.
So it means we're actually equal. So if I am able to sell myself better than you, people will probably go for me, despite that you have an edge over me. I would suspect that perhaps the women in general, assisted or maybe assisted by men, because remember, it's not their sole responsibility. We all in it. So if we see that Naledi is actually more talented, what is stopping me from being the one who's saying, but this is someone who must lead? But as I'm saying, we then get held back by those tendencies, directly or even indirectly. Some of them very subconscious, we are not even aware of them. So as a society as well, so remember, the ANC is part of the society. It calls itself the leader of society. Maybe it should be the first one to change it. But I think what South Africans still would want, even if that 50-50 at the top 6 were to be achieved, they would not want a window dressing. And I'm sure that's why in some instances you'd see them rejecting women, because they may feel in some aspects, so they do not have the kind of equality they would want. So I think those would be, this is a very complex issue. It's very complex, but in terms of talent and capabilities, we are all equal. Perhaps as the society, outside of the organization, let me just take it now as a societal thing, as I make an example between you and I, so we need to do more. But of course, them as the governing party, as the leader of society, they need to lead the way. They need to be able to say, we have these kinds of women who are ready to take up any position.
Yeah.
Let's see what they can do.
I mean, you've certainly heard DIRCO Minister Naledi Pandor, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, as well as Lindiwe Zulu themselves are speaking out and saying, well, there is an issue of patriarchy within the party. And perhaps that's something that you're correct, the party needs to address. But let's talk a little bit about all that fair representation, even where the young leaders are concerned. The likes of Pule Mabe, Oscar Mabuyane, Ronald Lamola. The likelihood that we're going to see them rising in this particular elective conference, and if not, what they look like for 2027. And a lot of them have said, I mean, Ronald Lamola has come out and said, well, I'm still young. I'm not in a rush.
I think also the young leaders, again, people will not simply support someone by virtue of being a young person. What if you are young and not capable? So what's the point? And then there's an older person who is capable and experienced. I think the young people need to be able as well to show that they are capable, they are willing, they are innovative. I guess it would be easier for people to support that. I think one of the questions, Naledi, that people kept asking was that if you look at the provinces, they are led by relatively young people in some of the ANC. I mean, just look at the provinces now. You can categorize them as young. So then the question is, in terms of service delivery, is there anything that sets them apart from what we already know?
Yeah.
If there is none, then someone will ask, why should I go for Naledi when she does exactly like the previous one? Maybe better the devil I know.
Yeah, one wonders though, what is the representation of good leadership within the party, where Pule Mabe as well is putting his name forward, and we see him at these press briefings doing quite a job of presenting a united front of the party. And is that something that we applaud or not? That's really for the public to decide, and certainly for the party to decide. But let's talk about where we are now in the program. So many questions around this as well. We know that the Deputy President has delivered his organizational report. Where is it? What does that look like? What does the rest of the program look like, considering the massive delays that we've already seen?
Right now, we need to go to, I think the part will need to go to, I think, the credentials session.
Yeah.
That is the most important aspect of the conference, because that is where the conference is made or broken up.
Yes.
Because there you have to verify whoever is there, are they there legally, were they properly mandated? And then once you have confirmed all of that, then you can now start the official business of the conference.
Do you think that's going to happen fairly and equitably when you've got members that are still outside, a lot of them decrying the fact that they're from KwaZulu-Natal? We spoke to one who's in the Free State.
That may pose challenges. In fact, Naledi, what we have seen happen is that in provinces, when there was a build-up to this conference, some of those conferences, like the Eastern Cape, it only started the business of the day on the last day. The conference here in Gauteng, it actually had to be adjourned. It had to stay for over two weeks. Of course, there were those provinces which concluded their business on time, so we must give credit to them. So all those delays, you know where they were held? At the credentials level. So should that repeat itself here, that will be a problem. But it's possible that some of these delays may be to confirm or verify the people who will be here. So it would be very interesting, perhaps, if they go smooth. And actually, that possibility is there.
Okay, that's an optimistic view. And of course, our political editor, Mzwandile Mpeche, very well versed in all things politics, and he'll be keeping us really abreast of things as they unfold here at the 55th National Conference of the ANC at Nasrec, Johannesburg. Let's head back to studio. Liesl, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Naledi. Again, rolling coverage coming through from Nasrec. Perhaps for more analysis, we're joined by political analyst Kani Magubani and Professor Beki Ngome Zulu to weigh in on perhaps what has happened and what other snubs and surprises we can expect for the rest of the 5 days as the conference unfolds. Kani, let me start with you. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you
Prof.
so much.
Thank you very much for making time to be with us here today.
Thank you for having me, and good afternoon to your viewers, and good afternoon to my colleague.
Thank you, Prof.
Perhaps as we look at what has transpired since the opening of the conference, Kani, let me start with you. Prof, I'll bring you into the conversation. Obviously marred by delays, yes. Which is going to affect the rest of the days. Pule Mabe earlier on during a briefing assuring us that it's not going to cause the conference to extend beyond the 5 days. Let's just look at the opening address of President Cyril Ramaphosa, perhaps also the disruptions that occurred and how it was handled. What message was sent and what is the impact going forward?
You know, Liesl, when I started hearing the rummaging, you know, they were clapping on the tables and they were hitting the tables. At first, I wasn't sure, is what's happening really happening? Because we knew that there were rumors that the political report of the president was going to get disrupted. Yes. But we didn't know to what extent it was going to and from which quarters it was going to come from. And so when the president started speaking, you just started hearing these murmurs and this banging on tables. And when you looked, you know, you saw a lot of the KZN branches doing that. And we saw Gwede Mantashe coming in and actually calling for security. However, what's also interesting is the amount of people that were against those disruptions, because I was observing, you know, who's doing the disrupting and what is the reaction of other delegates and how many people were doing the disruption. And we could see that it's really, it amounted to just a handful of people at the end of the day. You could see that for the most part, people actually wanted to have a conference that is driven by order and a sense of calm, because the president's report is very important for the conference, because he gives an overview of what his term in office has achieved and some of the challenges that they've been faced with. And for that to happen with disruptions, though, is also a signal that there is still a lot of anger. Yes, he's made it to the conference, but there's still a lot of anger and there's still a lot of rifts within the ANC in terms of, you know, the candidates list, in terms of the scandals that have accompanied the candidates. And there are many people who, you know, for many intensive purposes would rather that this was Ramaphosa's very last political report, that he shouldn't, you know, come back for, you know, another term. And we know that the next few days are going to be quite critical for the president. And as more delegates start making their way into, you know, the Nasrec Center, there may be bigger disruptions or there may be a sense of heightened security. So I think that's definitely something that we're going to be watching closely.
Yeah, absolutely. Prof, how would you weigh in on what transpired yesterday, just perhaps during the opening address and some of the disruptions that occurred so early on?
No, thank you very much for the question, Liesl. Yeah, most of the points that have been covered by my colleague, I fully agree with those. But I think there is a critical question we need to ask ourselves. How did we get here? Because what we saw happening yesterday is not something that was thought of just a few hours before the conference. There are things that have been simmering for quite a long time. And the question is, why did we allow that situation to happen? Because had we arrested all these concerns at an earlier stage, by the time we have this conference, then things would have been ironed out. So that is the most critical question. But the other thing I also observed is that when the former president came in, of course, there were people who were chanting Zuma, Zuma, Zuma. Before then, they broke into that song, the popular song, Wenzenu Zuma, Pendula Palapala. That in itself tells you that there are people who are not comfortable with the current president continuing leading the organization, which then gives you an indication as to what you might expect when voting time comes. There are people who will definitely vote against the president, but then you also saw that there were people who were on the side of the president. Those ones will definitely vote for him. But what was even more telling for me was the action or the reaction by Gwede Mantashe. At one point, he was not aware that we were listening to him on the mic when he was whispering to the president saying, yeah, those who are singing for you, allow them to sing. That in itself, in fact, is not helping the situation, because you have a divided conference already, and then instead of you trying to unite the conference, as people have been saying that they want to renew the organization, Then we have some officials basically pouring petrol on the already burning fire. So what are we going to achieve in that particular instance? So those are some of the key things that I observed, at least from what transpired yesterday.
So that was obviously the dynamics unfolding as he was giving the speech. Let's look at the contents of the speech. Many saying it sounded like a SONA address. Prof, let me continue with you before I bring Kanye back. President Cyril Ramaphosa really speaking about the lack of a unity, attacks on public platforms by certain members. But there are obviously many other factors that are driving people away from the ANC. Corruption, maladministration, lack of service delivery, failing municipalities. I mean, the list can go on and on, Eskom, etc. How would you weigh in on the impact of that opening address? Perhaps it's inspiration to set the tone for the conference as well.
There was very little inspiring in that speech, I must be honest. One thing I would have expected was for the president to start off the way he started when he finished former President Zuma's term. You recall that immediately when he ascended into power, he went to Davos and then he talked about the so-called 9 lost years. That was his first statement, an international statement for that matter. And then secondly, he talked about the new dawn. And then thirdly, he said he was going to revive the organization. Now, the question for me then is how much of that has the president been able to achieve? So that would have been the starting point. He would have said, this is what I promised when I ascended into this position, and this is how much I have achieved. That would have been an honest self-introspection by the president. As much as this is not his speech, is the speech that concerns the ANC as an organization, but because he made so many promises and set the bar too high for himself, then the most honorable thing to do would have been for the president to concede that things did not go well, and then to start then highlighting what were the causal factors, and then give hope that from now on, this is what we're planning to do. I was in fact disturbed this morning when I was listening to Oscar Mabuyane saying that the president had to cover the past 28 years. I said, no, man. Where is Oscar Mabuyane coming from? The president is supposed to account for the time that he has been in office. We've heard other speeches before by his predecessors. We want to know how much he has been able to achieve, where he has not achieved, what were the hindrances, and then what are the plans in the event that he's re-elected. For me, that is what would have set the tone. But from what I listened yesterday, honestly speaking, it was not encouraging. And I'm hoping that maybe those who are working with the president will assist him in other forums when he makes statements of this nature, that he must be honest with himself first, and then, of course, be honest with the general public. Because it's not only members of the ANC who are watching these proceedings, it's the nation, and then, of course, the international community as well.
Can you honesty, accountability, expectations and promises versus what has been achieved? I mean, we've been affected by load shedding just this morning when we look at stage 6 and perhaps even you coming here, perhaps also the conference unfolding. How did you receive what was touched on? What were you also expecting at this point?
You know, I think first of all, the president just wanted to get through it. With all the disruptions that were taking place, you could sense that his push was to ensure that he's getting his message out to the end. I think that what the president failed to do in terms of being honest is that he failed to mention that under his past leadership, you know, in this past 5 years, the ANC has had more cracks than it's ever had, you know, in its history. Factionalism has become more pronounced under his leadership in the ANC. We've seen political ideology move, you know, to polarization where people see things from such different point of views. Under his leadership, we've seen for the first time the suspension of a Secretary General. We've seen an ANC running without an effective Secretary General's office for the first time since the history of the ANC. He also failed to mention that under his presidency or his president leadership within the ANC, for the first time, we saw defiance. You know, usually we've always known that even if there are differences within the ANC, for the longest time, the ANC has tried to present a united front. But since Ramaphosa took over, we've seen that those casual courtesies have been thrown out of the window. And we've always expected that Ramaphosa was going to have a difficult term because he came into the top seat in a multi-slate NEC.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't come into the presidency with just his people. He came in with Didi Mabuza. He came in with people coming from different factions. And I think he knew from day one that daggers were going to be out for him. It became worse when he pronounced that there's going to be a step aside, what clause. And
yes.
that, of course, we saw impacting the likes of Ace Magashule. And we've seen it impacting many other comrades. And this, of course, made Ramaphosa very unpopular. And I think that in his report yesterday, he should have said, I know I've been unpopular. I know comrades have not liked A, B, C, D, E, but this is what we are trying to achieve. So he didn't really set out what his vision was and how effectively he carried it out. But most importantly, he didn't give us a sense that this is part of a long-term plan and this is part of a long-term vision, because I would have expected him to say, stay with me. Even if there are some uncomfortable parts, we are going somewhere. This is where we are taking the ANC. This is my vision. He failed to do that. So what starts to happen is that we start to see all of these policies that are coming up, you know, ANC policies, start to becoming more reactive. We are reacting to people being corrupt. We are reacting to people being found in scandals. We are reacting. Whereas the ANC's policies should not be coming from a reactive point of view, but should be coming from a visionary point of view, that we have these particular clauses because we want the ANC to get to that point. But at this particular juncture, we don't know what this point is. We don't know what the picture the ANC has for itself is.
Well, speaking of visionary, we obviously have to look at what the nominations reflect.
Yeah.
Perhaps also what that means for the country at large. I'm asking this because we can't ignore the fact that the ANC is still relevant in the country, given that it is the leading party, yes, and based on what happened during local government elections. But want us to start to question the relevance of the party going forward for the country at large. And I want to look at the representation of women, of youth, a change of guard, etc. What's also been reflected in that sense, particularly, I guess, as we look at the needs of South Africa at large?
If we look at the ANC and how the ANC is designed, they have leagues. Right, we've got the Youth League, we've got the Women's League, we've got the Veterans League, we've got what we call Masupatsila, which is the babies, that are coming up. And the reason why those leagues are there is to build a type of growth system that you grow from one league to another to another. For the longest time, for instance, the Youth League is known to have produced future leaders. It was seen as a grooming school. People like Fikile Mbalula come from there. People like Mzwandile Masina come from the Youth League. People like Buti Manamela come from the Malusi Kikaba. However, we've seen that the ANC Youth League has failed to produce any type of leaders in the last year, 2 or 3, that we could say these are the forerunners to be groomed as the future leader. We've seen the Women's League struggle to successfully put forward candidates that are adopted or chosen by branches, because you must remember that just because you are a woman, that in itself within the current ANC processes is not enough. You've got to have support of the branches. Your name has to be brought forward. That is the process. So we've got to then create an environment that allows women to show up in their fullest potential, not as women candidates.
Yes.
Women candidates kind of starts to give the impression that we have a ring-fence position that's just for women, and it's usually the DSG's position, the Deputy Secretary General position, which was previously held by the late Jesse Duarte. And I would have hoped that, for some of the bigger seats within the ANC top 6, the Treasurer General, the Deputy President, even the presidency position itself, I would have dared the ANC itself to put the NDZs there, to put the Lindiwe Sisulu, to say if you believe in them, so much, and if they believe in themselves so much, let them campaign with the men. Let them go with the big boys. Let's see how they fare. They say they still can if they are nominated from the floor, and they haven't given up yet. So we see that on many fronts, whether you're talking youth or women, the ANC, in Ramaphosa's presidency at least, has failed to produce any future leaders from those leagues.
So, Prof, on the back of what Khanyi's just echoed, and as we begin to look at the different chess moves that are happening, obviously President Cyril Ramaphosa having an advantage, being the incumbent, Zweli Mkhize perhaps being looked at having secured KZN at this point. But obviously we know nominations and voting for the top 6 office bearers are also going to be happening today, and that's also going to show us and reveal some snubs and surprises. I wonder what you're expecting on that front. What should we be looking out for at this point?
No, thank you very much for that. No, you know what? From the way I look at things, the president has a potential to emerge victorious, not because he's the best candidate, but because of other reasons. Remember that this factional politics has killed the organization. Those of us who have studied the ANC, not just in the South African context, but in the context of the African continent and globally, we are disappointed. Honestly speaking, we are disappointed. Because the leadership has moved away from the values of the ANC, they've moved away from the founding documents of the ANC, and we have no clear picture as to the direction that the organization is taking. So you might have seen some glimpses of what is likely to happen today when the NWC deliberated on the Phala matter and made its recommendation to the special NEC meeting. And the NEC meeting, of course, came to a conclusion that the Section 89 panel report led by former Chief Justice Ngobo should be rejected. And then they didn't end there. They went on to instruct their members of parliament that they must reject that report. And the president, on the other hand, had also taken this particular report under review, which in my view was in fact unnecessary and in fact premature, because in this case, the panel report was not a final document. It was just a recommendation, and then members of parliament to still debate it. Even if they'd adopted it, it wouldn't mean that the president was going to lose the position tomorrow, because Section 89 is a very lengthy process, which at the end will need 2/3 majority. So looking at the context and the history of what has happened thus far, then I would say that the president stands a better chance to win, not because he's the best candidate, but because of the reasons I've just outlined. But then, of course, this is politics. Anything is possible. You recall what happened in 2017. Most of us are of the view that Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma already had this in the bag, until at the very last moment, the president emerged victorious with only 179 votes, and thanks to the now Deputy President Didi Mabuza. So you may still see some upsets, not only because there will be people who will be nominated from the floor, but also because people will change allegiances. You recall that there are people who are sent by delegates, who are sent as delegates by their branches with a clear mandate who to vote for. But once they arrive at the conference venue, they then change gear and then they vote for somebody else. Yeah. So those are some of the dynamics. But in the broader scheme of things, I think that the president stands a better chance to win. So for me, there are two things. One, you have a battle, and then two, we have a war. In this case, you have a battle, which the president is most likely to win. Then the question is, will the ANC win the war in 2024 with the president at the helm of the ANC? That is the most critical question for me, which I think delegates will have to think seriously about and be mindful of whatever decision they make.
Well, on the back of that, more questions than answers at this point. Again, we'll continue to monitor and see what unfolds throughout the weekend, throughout the 5 days. Thank you very much to political analyst Khanyi Magubane and Professor Bheki Mngomezulu for weighing in on what has transpired since the opening of the ANC's National Elective Conference, the 55th edition. Again, here on the SABC, we're bringing you all the latest. In fact, just earlier, the ANC leadership says that its 55th National Conference is proceeding as planned. The party is on day 2 of its conference, as I alluded to earlier on. All that taking place at Nasrec in Johannesburg. ANC spokesperson Bule Mabe was speaking during a media briefing.
We are hoping that today we'll deal with all reports and we'll also deal with the nomination of officials and possibly the voting of officials later on. our delegates just have to understand that we may have to work for much longer than we had anticipated, so that we can still meet the timelines we have set out to do this conference. The reason why this conference is called a national elective conference is because part of the critical things that it must do is that it must elect the leadership of the ANC. But already you had a policy forum in the form of the policy conference that dealt with all your policies. Those of you who were here in July sat with us here. I mean, at one stage we had a 6-hour press briefing just dealing with policy discussion documents. So critical to this conference is the election of the leadership that must be able to lead the organization for the next 5 years. So we are doing everything possible within our power, working around the clock to make sure that the conference is proceeding as planned. So there is nothing that suggests that conference will not proceed as planned. Actually, it's all hands on deck.
All right, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana says that the Eskom tariff decision by the energy regulator will determine government's plans for the future of the power utility. Godongwana was addressing the ministerial business breakfast hosted by the Progressive Business Forum. This was on the sidelines of the ANC's 55th National Conference at Nasrec in Johannesburg.
The sustainability of the power utility is tied to the NERSA's tariff decision. National Treasury is hoping that the approved tariff will allow Eskom to be sustainable. Eskom has applied for a 32% tariff hike to reflect the cost of producing and distributing electricity. But Godongwana is concerned that his fellow politicians may not approve the proposed steep hike, posing a risk to both Eskom and sovereign debt.
The quantum of that debt will depend on a number of things. One of which is what NERSA will say. Because it will determine Eskom's sustainability moving forward.
Godongwana says government has put in over 200 billion rand into Eskom in the past 3 years and sees no point in continuing to do so as the power utility continues to grapple with the power generation. In light of the IMF loan to Eskom, Godongwana says he is caught between a rock and a hard place.
Precisely because of these challenges Eskom is facing. I was debating this matter in Parliament. People are saying, you continue bailing out, continue bailing out. I said, by the way, the bulk of Eskom's debt is guaranteed by the sovereign. So if I don't take out, Eskom will drag me down with them when they fail to do that.
Godongwana also addressed the $8.5 billion loan to address climate change. He says this is not a grant, but a debt. He says the country will need to have an alternative development program in the process of decarbonizing to meet the global standards of net zero emissions by 2050. This is to avoid the misplacement of thousands of jobs in the coal mining sector and those working for the current fleet of Eskom coal power stations.
As you are aware, the developed world announced $8.5 billion, and everybody was excited. Everybody was excited. However, it remains one thing, it remains that. It remains one thing, it remains that. I must confess that in certain areas, in certain countries, we've been able to get some concessional loans. It's not a grant, it's that.
Godongwana says the road to zero emissions is of significant importance as climate change is already evident in the country. This is seen in the recent KZN floods that are now also seen in Gauteng with the current rains. Nothando Makutulela, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Right, on that note, let's take a quick ad break. We continue with more news and updates on the other side. You're watching The Week in Review. Welcome back. The Week in Review with myself, Liesl Wilson, continues. Now, the Eskom board, in other news, says Andre de Ruyter will continue to serve as the power utilities CEO until March 31st next year. In a statement, the board chairperson, Mpho Makwana, indicated that de Ruyter had agreed to stay beyond the stipulated 30-day notice. Meanwhile, Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan has refused to directly respond to accusations that outgoing Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter is a traitor. Last week, Mineral Resources and Energy Minister Gwede Mantashe said that de Ruyter and Eskom management were actively agitating for the overthrow of the state as it continues to implement load shedding. Perhaps for more on this, let's bring in energy expert Ted Blom. Ted, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. I dare say good afternoon, given what has transpired within the last 24 hours. Perhaps, you could weigh in on the resignation of Andre de Ruyter, his tenure, the impact of de Ruyter's exit on South Africa as we address the energy crisis.
Well, I think it's very simple. As far as I can see, in summary, it's been 3 wasted years because Mr. de Ruyter came in as a novice. He came in through a political backdoor, and he's left Eskom in a bigger mess than what it was when he received it. So I think it's a time that there is change, and that people are held accountable for what's happened, and that we're now in deep trouble. And Eskom needs to go into ICU immediately and be put under the control of a specialist turnaround team. Otherwise, we're going to lose Eskom and we're going to lose South Africa.
Well, speaking of accountability, how would you weigh in on the impact of the board to date as well? Obviously, they need to act with urgency to announce a replacement, even if it's going to be temporarily, given the crisis that South Africa is in. How would you also weigh in on their role to date?
Well, I think the role of the board, which has been there since October, has been a little bit disappointing in that they promised to communicate within 30 days with the plan of action. They're now talking about a mysterious turnaround plan, which they haven't published for comment to the public. And I really think that there are a lot of stakeholders in this matter, because Eskom affects every single person and company inside this country. So, and the current situation is untenable. With the 4-hour load shedding, most people's inverters and batteries cannot last. And it also, today we have 10 hours of load shedding. It's impossible to conduct any business. And even on a day with 8 hours of load shedding, that's the whole business day gone. So no, we need drastic action, and we also, I think, in order to consolidate the situation, we need drastic measures. We need alignment between the Eskom stakeholders or board, and we need alignment between the Ministry of Mineral and Energy Affairs, because 90% of Eskom's problems emanate from poor coal quality, and that's what's given rise to all the major breakdowns. If you can sort out the coal quality, you can probably rescue about 6 gigawatts of breakdowns and load shedding, and that will have an immediate impact on the level of load shedding and an immediate impact on the health of the economy. So I think there's no time now to start with new novices. We have to spend another 2 to 3 years learning the ropes with Eskom. You need a team, because there are lots of issues at Eskom that need addressing, at least 6 or 7 issues. So you need a team of at least 6 or 7 specialists who've got deep experience. They don't have to be there forever. They need to have a mandate, and they need to be given a pen to override whatever the hiccups are, the red tape is that's holding Eskom back. We can't sit and wait for a tender for a year or 2 years before we start implementing action. We need drastic action, and we need it before the end of January.
Well, speaking of the urgency and looking at the urgency of the matter, this is obviously going to be part of the discussions that's taking place as the ANC's elective conference gets underway. This is the country experiences stage 6 load shedding. And, given the issues of corruption, energy generation, distribution, even transition, green energy transition, What are going to be some of those priorities for this 5 days, but perhaps also come, next year as we head into 2024 for elections?
No, yes, no, certainly. I mean, if the ANC botches up this last opportunity to try and do some remedying at Eskom, I'm afraid it's going to count very heavily when it comes to the election year. And yes, all the issues you mentioned, that's why I say you need a turnaround team of at least 6 or 7, or ideally 10 people, because somebody will need to keep record and do the governance issues. But and they must be given a mandate. They can be held accountable and subject to scrutiny, but they mustn't be hamstrung by the PFMA and other sort of legislative hurdles whilst we apply emergency treatment in the ICU to Eskom to resuscitate it and try and get it off the load shedding. And that it covers coal procurement, it covers the corruption, it covers the refurbishment of the boilers. In fact, I mean, the Reuter came with some pretty sensible noises at the beginning of his tenure. He talked about refurbishing. Some of the stuff I think was pie in the sky. He talked about getting warranties from the OEMs. You're not going to get warranties from any OEMs on abused equipment. But bringing in the OEMs in principle is not a bad idea, because they put that equipment together and they should best know how to fix it up and sort it out with the original parts and not parted parts that Eskom has been using over the last 20 years. So yes, and then together with sorting out the overstaffing at Eskom, sorting out the balance sheet. I think half of the balance sheet can be cleaned up immediately by sorting out the corruption and writing off the corrupt amounts. And I know the banks are going to squeal because they were participants in a lot of that corrupt funding, which Eskom never deserved. There are very senior executives in Eskom that also need to face the chop and face the music, and as Mr. Gordon says, the orange overalls, because they fully participated in funding the corruption within Eskom. So it's widespread, and that's why you need a task force of several people that are independent, not subject to political and party whims, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it calls for something that South Africa has never seen before in its history, never mind 28-year history of the ANC, but in its 300-year history, we've never been in such a dire situation, and that's why it calls for drastic action. And I doubt there's any South African who will argue with me that this situation is not dire and warrants drastic action.
Ted, in conclusion, we're just looking at the different responses and approaches rather at this point from the Public Enterprises Minister, from the Energy Minister, from the Board Chair as well. This as we continue to weigh up the costs of load shedding and beyond. Lack of coherent lack of coherent sentiments and beyond. How reflective is that also, given the management of the crisis? And really in conclusion, as the poorest of the poor really bear the brunt, obviously there are ripple effects going through for the rest of the country, perhaps in terms of trading and business. What do you really hope to expect within this festive period and beyond?
Okay, so I mean, my first point was that we need 100% alignment between the ministry and Eskom and Eskom's leadership.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm calling for the Eskom control to be divested from political control and put in the hands of a proper professional turnaround team. Then as far as the impact on the poorest of the poor, I mean, it's a crying shame that we have let our people down so badly when we promised them a rosy new dawn and a new rainbow South Africa. And really, my heart bleeds for those people who don't even have money to put on the table to buy food for their children. And it's really been a big disappointment for everybody. And if this conference concludes before the festive season without addressing these issues comprehensively, then the ANC is not the party of the people. I'm afraid to say it's as blunt as it is, but that's the reality.
Ted Blom, energy expert. Let's leave the conversation there. Thank you very much for your time, really weighing in on what has transpired this week. This on the back of the announcement of Andre de Ruyter having announced his resignation. Again, Eskom board also coming out to say that he will be serving as the Power Utilities CEO until the 31st of March next year. Again, thank you very much to Ted Blom for weighing in on some of the issues that continue to plague the power utility. And we're going to take it to other news that have that's made headlines this week. We've seen beachgoers in Durban made the most of the day of Reconciliation Day, in fact, to take in some sun, some sea, and to surf. That's despite a number of beaches remaining closed due to high E. coli levels.
Celebrating the Day of Reconciliation with a splash, holidaymakers flocked to some of the popular beaches in the city, despite a number of beaches remaining closed due to high E. coli levels. This did not deter some revelers, surfers and sunbathers who took advantage of the beaches declared safe. However, many still had their reservations about taking a dip in the ocean.
I'm not one for too much of the history, but just enjoying the day out. Obviously, I would have been in the beach, but with the current conditions, it's a no for me. But however, just enjoying the sun.
I don't trust the municipality on that, because honestly, we still can get this hazardous smell and stuff, and it's not on.
We've got our little safe zone about here, but I think the more you travel north, the worse it gets.
There's a northerly current, so if anything south of the Mgani, you should be fine. But I mean, don't take my word for it. I might have to ask me later.
While others were happy to enjoy the beach and a swim.
We were kind of disappointed that the beach was closed or what, but we said we're gonna go dark or blue, we're just going there, only to find out that the situation is manageable, everything is just so well, we're enjoying ourselves a lot. We've been planning for this day long time ago, we couldn't just miss it like that.
We are far from that side of Limpopo in Hammanskraal, just next to Pretoria. And then we are here just to think about our Lord, the Creator, who made this city happen. We are very, very glad.
Have you gone into the ocean yet?
Yes, it's nice inside the water.
Enjoying, it's nice to be at the beach here on the 16th.
No, the sun is out.
The sun is out, everything is all right. It's nice to be here. Perfect. I wish everyone can come here in Durban. Everyone, Josie, Pretoria, everywhere, Kimberley, they must come here.
Lifeguards were on high alert. Patrols were carried out on the shore as well as by boat. But beaches at the popular Mhlanga, which are still unsafe due to high E. coli levels, were empty. Extra safety officers have also been deployed to the beachfront. The city has adopted a zero-tolerance approach to those who break the law this summer season. Jade Paulser, SABC News, Durban.
Well, that's all we have for you today. Again, throughout the weekend, we'll be bringing you rolling coverage, day 2 of the ANC's National Elective Conference taking place in Nasrec. Issue of credentials will top agenda today. Of course, you can catch us on our various social media platforms as well as extended coverage on SABC+. But from myself, Liesl Wilson and the rest of the team, until tomorrow for a look at the week ahead, it's goodbye for now.